India claims to have conducted a surgical strike across the line of control. Now, this move comes after 18 soldiers were killed in a terror attack at Uri in Kashmir. The army has said that there were multiple casualties on the other side as they launched attacks against 5 terror launch pads. Indian forces did not suffer any casualties. India is getting support from its neighbour Bangladesh. In fact, the United States has also called on Pakistan to put an end to terrorism. India has briefed ambassadors from 22 countries about its surgical strike that was conducted at midnight. And joining us now to discuss this further is the former Finance Minister as well as the former External Affairs Minister, Mr. Yashwant Sinha. Sir, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. I want to first talk to you about the manner in which this midnight strike has been conducted. I don't think anyone can fault the government because this seems like a very thought-through, measured and calibrated move.
You're absolutely right, because what the Prime Minister said and what the DGMO said, what the Defence Minister said, has finally been done by India, namely strike at a place and time of our choice. And last night was the choice that India made, and the places that we picked up were the launch pads of the terrorists. So what is to be noted is that we did not strike at Pakistani army formations. We have struck at the launching pad of terrorists. And therefore, I regard this as a defining moment in the evolution of our policy towards Pakistan, that for the first time, we have said we'll strike and strike hard. And, 1971 was war. 1965 was war. Kargil was war, but even in the Kargil war, we did not cross the line of control.
Right.
This is the first time that India has gone across the LOC to strike at terrorist camps. So this is, I would say, this is a defining moment in the history of India.
You're saying that this is a defining moment in the history of India. Let me ask you, sir, because you've lived through the Kargil war and you did have to, in a sense, look after the economy as well. And there is, a sense of panic and nervousness at this point in time, specifically if one were to talk about, the bond markets as well as the stock markets. I wanted to understand now what we can really expect the government to do, or what could be the government's approach in order to allay concerns that this is going to continue to be a localized operation as and when even if it were to continue. As of now, they very categorically stated that it's the end of the surgical strikes. Mr. Sinha, can you hear me? We seem to have lost that line with Yashwant Sinha, but we will reconnect with him. Of course, the former Foreign Affairs Minister as well as the former Finance Minister in conversation with us, very categorically stating that this is a defining moment in India-Pakistan relations. But my colleague Arunoday Mukharji now joins me to recap exactly how the operations unfolded last night. Arunoday.
Let's put out some of those big points now for you as to what exactly we're looking at when we say surgical strikes were carried out by Indian forces well inside the line of control. India's surgical strikes were on 5 terror camps. They're being called terror launch pads, and this was about 1 to 3 kilometers well inside the line of control into Pakistani territory. 5 terror camps across the line of control have been razed to the ground is what we're learning for the moment. More details are expected out as they trickle in slowly. The army started marching across the line of control sometime around midnight. What we're trying to do is recreate what has happened based on what our sources are now telling us. Terrorists and the Pakistani army personnel suffered major casualties in that strike. They were caught off guard as well. The terrorists were taken by surprise, and there was no retaliation is what we're learning. It was it was an operation carried out with military precision. Surgical strikes were recorded by the security forces as well, so there is evidence of the strike that has now been carried out. 7 launch pads were under observation for the past 1 week. They were being identified, selected, and a plan was being put in place as to how to eliminate these terror launch pads. The military forces were kept in operational mode for an entire week's time to prepare for any kind of operation that will be decided. All defense forces continue to be in a state of standby, especially after the operation has been carried out. All villages within 10 kilometers of the border areas in Punjab have been told to be evacuated, is what we're learning. This is, of course, simply a precautionary measure just to ensure the safety of civilians living along the border areas.
Arunoday, many thanks for joining us. Also joining us this evening is former IFS officer Pavan Varma and now leader of the JDU. Mr. Varma, appreciate you joining us. Of course, leaders across political lines have met with the government. The government has explained what took place last night and have supported the decision of the government and, of course, lauded the army's efforts. But, you know, we were just having a conversation with Yashwant Sinha, and he clearly stated that this is the first time that India has crossed over the LOC, and hence he believes that this is a defining moment in the evolution of how India deals with Pakistan. Would you agree?
Well, I think it demonstrates a new kind of political resolve which has been taken after India remained a passive and relatively inactive spectator to the repeated violations both of its sovereignty and repeated losses of lives of both our brave soldiers and civilians. So verifiable intrusion into our territory by the use of terrorism as a state policy had reached a point where a government needed to react, and we congratulate the central government, as indeed Mr. Nitish Kumar has done, and our brave armed forces for the resolve to send this message that enough is enough. And I can say to you that there were earlier occasions when at least I, in my personal opinion, believed, and I've written about this, when India should have crossed the line of control. After Kargil, when there was verifiable intrusion into your territory,
Right.
the right thing to do was to cross the line of control, seal it so as to cut off the supplies to the intruders. But we chose not to do so, and I disagree with that strategy, because we sent 1,000 of our young soldiers and officers to near certain death because the Pakistani intruders were on high vantage points.
No, you're right.
So I'm glad we've taken this step because it sends a message. And just the last point I want to add, ultimately, other countries respect nations, and especially nations which claim great power status for themselves, when they are prepared to defend themselves and stand up for their rights.
Right. Mr. Varma, I want to now talk to you about, and we hope that there is no further military escalation, but we don't know whether there is likely to be retaliatory action or not. Of course, we are fully prepared to deal with the consequences of that. But in terms of diplomatic offensive now, we saw the government today reach out to 22 ambassadors of 22 countries to try and explain India's position from a diplomatic front, especially to get the international community to support India. What would you like to see the government do?
In fact, I believe that this is not the time to rest on our laurels. This is not the time to gloat or to boast. We have reason to be proud. And we need to continue with our diplomatic blitzkrieg across the world, and in particular, important chancelleries of the world, such as in the EU, in Washington, and in Beijing, to press home the point that the threat of terror from Pakistan is not only a terror threat to India, but to the world at large. Now, this must be done in parallel and continuously and in a sustained and focused manner.
Let me put that point across to Mr. Yashwant Sinha. Mr. Sinha, we were just talking about how India needs to continue to up the ante and the diplomatic offensive to try and isolate Pakistan even further. We do know that Susan Rice has called on the NSA Ajit Doval this morning, saying that they believe that Pakistan will take some action. But this global war against terror, India needs to leverage this opportunity. What is it that you would like? I mean, forget the diplomatic engagement with Pakistan, but what would you like to see India do now to step up the diplomatic offensive to isolate Pakistan?
Well, I think we are on the right track as far as the diplomatic offensive is concerned. But I'd like to tell you, we were, the phone line got disconnected. I was a little surprised at the behavior of the stock market and the currency market today. And I'd like to remind you that when the Kargil operations were on, you will recall that our Sensex was rising according to the number of the peak that we were capturing.
Right.
If that was 4,300 meters high, then the Sensex will touch 4,300. And the chart that you're showing on your screen about growth rates slumping, let me tell you that it was not on account of any war that we were fighting with Pakistan, that sub 5% growth was largely on account of a very, very severe bad monsoon.
Yes.
That was one of the worst monsoon rains that we have, deficient rains that we have recorded, and that's what brought the growth rate down, not the Kargil operation.
Sure.
So I'll ask the market to step up. There is no reason for disappointment. In fact, the market should actually go up and the rupee should strengthen because India has shown strength. Now, as far as diplomacy is concerned, India has done the explaining. We'll have to continue to do it because the global community must be convinced that what we have done is not merely right, but this was absolutely necessary for India to do it. And I'm sure they'll understand. And there is no question of India being criticized in the global community on account of this operation.
Mr. Sinha, you spoke about how you're perplexed with the reaction of the currency market as well as the equity markets. But let me stretch that point across because we do have the first monetary policy that Urjit Patel along with the MPC will present. And while you were talking about how on account of the Kargil war, we didn't really see growth necessarily slump. It was more to do with other factors like the drought, etc. But inflation has always gone higher during the times of conflict. So do you believe that this in any way at all will weigh on the governor's mind, on the MPC's mind when it meets on the 4th of October?
It should not. It should not. Again, let's check the empirical evidence about inflation. Because, if we have the worst drought of the century, naturally it reflects in elevated levels of inflation. Not necessarily because there has been some military operation. And you will recall that in those days, post Kargil, I remember we had, in the interim before we were returned to power, we had raised substantially the prices of petroleum products because the global crude prices had gone up. And that was a very important reason for the elevated levels of inflation that we experienced in the next few months. So if my memory serves me right, neither for lower growth rate nor for inflation can we blame military operation against Pakistan.
Right. Sir, before I let you go, I know we have you on a patchy line, but before I let you go, you talked about this being a defining moment in India's evolution on how it engages or deals with Pakistan. We are now given to understand that the army and, of course, the government is prepared for any retaliatory action. But in your experience, do you believe that Pakistan will also like to wait and then approach this in a much more measured fashion, given the fact that the global community has its eyes and its radars on it at this point?
We have to be prepared for the worst kind of reaction from Pakistan. Pakistan certainly will try and hit us where it considers us to be the weakest. That's what they have done in the past. And therefore, our army has to be fully prepared, and I'm listening to the statements of the armed forces, and I'm assured that the army is fully prepared for any emergency operation on the part of Pakistan, any contingency which might arise.
Mr. Sinha, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us. The former Finance Minister and External Affairs Minister Yashwant Sinha, they're weighing in, calling this a defining moment in India's evolution.